that Mexican cartels are using apps like TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram to recruit American teenagers to try and engage in human smuggling and help the cartels.
I was going on 13 years old the first time I took a life.
At a very young age, Gabriel Cardona went from being a teenage petty criminal in Laredo, Texas, to being one of the deadliest recruits for the Zetas cartel, one of Mexico's most feared drug cartels. So here are 10 of the youngest cartel members in history.
A baby-faced American teenager accused of working as an assassin for the South Pacific drug cartel was paraded in front of reporters. Edgar Jimenez Lugo.
It would be the threats and drugs fueling Edgar Jimenez Lugo, as he committed one of the most brutal crimes that shocked the nation. A crime that gave him the moniker El Ponchis, as he made headlines for his involvement in cartel violence at a very young age. Born 1996 in San Diego, California, Edgar grew up on the border between the US and Mexico. His childhood would take a dark turn around his early teens when he was initially kidnapped, before he was eventually recruited by the South Pacific Cartel, Cartel del Pacífico Sur, a splinter group of the Beltran Leyva cartel. They're known for their extreme violence and found Edgar very vulnerable and easy to manipulate. What made Edgar's story stand out was how young he was when he became involved in such violent crimes. By the time he was 14, he was already notorious for carrying out gruesome assassinations. Under the orders of the cartel, Edgar was reportedly responsible for beheading victims, a brutal act gaining him infamy when videos and photos of his crimes surfaced online. Now, Edgar claimed he was forced into the cartel's violent world. According to him, he was threatened with death if he didn't comply. His claims paint a picture of a boy who grows up under severe psychological and physical abuse from older cartel members who would control him further by giving him drugs. In December 2010, Edgar was captured by the Mexican military as he was attempting to flee to the US with his two sisters. His arrest made international headlines, sparking discussions about how young people are often exploited by criminal organizations. At just 14 years of age, he confessed to the murders, shocking many, both due to the brutality of the crimes and his age. In 2011, Edgar was given 3 years in a Mexican juvie center, the max sentence for a minor. During his time in custody, Edgar was seen to have expressed regret and claimed that he wanted to move on from his violent past, as he harbored dreams of a normal life. Upon his release in 2013, Edgar left for San Antonio to reunite with his family. It's reported he left for the US for his own safety, for fear of dancing to the tune of his own music.
Going on 13 years old the first time I took a life. I know it's not right taking people's lives, but that's one of the things I'm good at.
Rosalio Rea's story is both chilling and tragic, offering a look into how easily young lives can spiral into violence when entangled with dangerous influences, especially from close friends. Born in 1990 in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, Mexico, Rea's life took a dramatic turn when, as a teenager, he became involved with the deadly Mexican drug cartels. By the time he was 13, through the influence of his friend, Gabriel Cardona, who was already a member of the cartel, Rea was then recruited by the Zetas. The group had a reputation for its brutal methods and saw potential in Rea. Now, he quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a trusted sicario or hitman for the cartel. His training and initiation was brutal and would involve murder, an act that was designed to strip him of any remaining innocence. Rea was reportedly sent on assassination missions in both Mexico and the US, carrying out his orders with cold precision. But despite his age, he would become a key figure in the Zetas' violent operations, tasking with taking out anyone who would cross paths with the cartel. However, like many young people caught up in cartel lifestyle, Rea's path was unsustainable. His downfall began in 2006 when at 17 years old he agreed to testify against the Zetas for fear of his life after a failed assassination attempt in Mexico. The police found out he was involved in multiple killings, and he was eventually convicted of his murders. During his trial, Rea openly spoke about his time with the Zetas, offering a rare insight into the life of a teenage hitman. His candid revelations were amazing, as they highlighted how easily cartels could manipulate young, vulnerable kids and turn them into these heinous killers. Rea serving out a 70-year sentence. But his story is a stark reminder of how violence and crime can consume someone so young. He's expressed regret over his actions, acknowledging that his choices were wrong, though the scars of his past are undeniable. Raul Meza Torres, often known as El Mini 6, was born into a world tied into organized crime. He was the son of Raul Meza Ontiveros, a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa Cartel, who worked closely with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Now, growing up in this environment, Raul was exposed to the workings of the cartel from a young age. His father was a trusted member of the cartel until he was killed in a violent shootout in 2007. This event significantly impacted young Raul, who, rather than stepping away from the violent life, was drawn deeper into this criminal underworld. The Meza family's reputation and close ties to the Sinaloa cartel seemed to seal his fate. Raul, like his father, was seen as a rising star within the organization. He quickly became known for his involvement in violent activities, and his nickname, El Mini 6, referenced his father's own nickname within the cartel. His youthful energy and ties to the old guard made him a key figure in the cartel's operations. He became a symbol of a younger generation in organized crime, violent, fearless, and ready to take risks. But his life would come to a violent end at just 18 years old, following what started as a routine traffic stop in Zapopan, Jalisco, on April 25, 2010. During the stop, Raul and an associate reportedly attempted to intimidate the officers by brandishing weapons. When the police demanded they surrendered, the situation escalated, leading Raul to fatally shoot one officer. In return, the other officer shot him. He was rushed to a private hospital, but was declared dead later that morning. Some remember Raul's short life as a tragic figure, a young man who was a product of his circumstances, but others saw him as just another pawn in the never-ending cartel wars. Before he was born, Edgar Guzman Lopez was predestined to be the next thing in the world of narcotics. Unfortunately, a case of mistaken identity from El Chapo's own gunman led to the demise of the cartel prince. Born May 30, 1986, Edgar Guzman Lopez was the son of notorious Sinaloa cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Griselda Lopez Perez. Now, being the son of one of the most notorious drug lords in history, Lopez was brought into drugs practically from the very start. Now, despite being groomed as his father's successor, he was partially kept away from the cartel's operations until he finished his education. By 2008, Edgar had proudly produced his first batch of cocaine paste and was ready to go deep into the family business. Against his father's advice, Edgar decided to travel to Chicago, Illinois, with his friend Arturo Meza Cazares, despite the risk of being captured. Defying the danger, the trip was pretty successful, and they both returned safely to Mexico. Upon their return, they tried to get into Culiacan, a stronghold of the Sinaloa cartel, driving in a red SUV. But that night, a fatal mistake occurred. At this time, some of El Chapo's own gunmen confused their vehicle with one belonging to Arturo Beltran Leyva, a rival cartel leader. And acting on a piece of mistaken information, they reported the sighting and were given orders to eliminate the occupants of that vehicle. In a tragic turn of events, the gunmen unleash over 500 bullets, killing both Edgar and Arturo. Edgar's friend, El Metrico, was devastated when he discovered the bodies. This event left him heartbroken and in turmoil, realizing what had just happened. Initially, the media reported that the deaths were the result of an attack by the BLO, rather than the tragic friendly fire that actually took place, which ended the life of El Chapo's successor. Maximilian Schmidt, better known as Shiny Flakes, the teenage mastermind who harnessed the power of the dark web and built a global drug empire from his bedroom. This guy ran an international narcotics operation, becoming one of the most notorious figures in cybercrime history. Born and raised in Leipzig, Germany, Schmidt was just a teenager when he began diving into the digital world, quickly realizing the potential of the internet for illicit activities. What made Schmidt's story so unique wasn't just his age, but the sheer scale of the operation he built, largely on his own. In 2013, at the age of 18, Max launched his online drug empire. Using his alias, Shiny Flakes, he would create a sophisticated website where customers could anonymously buy various types of illegal drugs. His site operated much like an online store, with detailed product descriptions, customer reviews, and even a customer service chat. He primarily operated out of his bedroom, cleverly shipping his products across Europe in ordinary-looking packages. Now, his operation wasn't on a small scale either. He moved tons of drugs ranging from marijuana to cocaine, MDMA, and even prescription pills, all through the Postal Service. The astonishing thing here is that he handled everything himself. We're talking processing orders, managing logistics, and ensuring deliveries were made. Schmidt made millions, all without ever leaving the confines of his own comfy home. However, the massive success wouldn't go unnoticed for long. By 2015, German authorities, after months of investigation, finally tracked down Schmidt. A series of missteps, which mainly included postal workers noticing the frequent, oddly similar packages being sent from the same location, kinda led police right to his door. This kid was arrested in his Leipzig apartment, where they found 320 kilos of drugs and millions of euros worth of illegal sales. At just 20 years old, Schmidt was sentenced to 7 years in juvie detention, coupled with 3 million euros he was to pay the state. This blew up internationally, and his story later became the inspiration for the Netflix series How to Sell Drugs Online Fast. Schmidt's arrest didn't fully reveal where much of his profits went, which led to speculation about hidden caches of money and drugs. His rise and fall demonstrated both the potential and peril of the dark web, where anonymity and the illusion of safety come crashing down. Juan's story is a harsh reality faced by many teens in cartel-ridden areas, where poverty, lack of opportunities, and the lure of quick money can pull them into dangerous worlds. Now, Juan was just 15, a freshman in high school, when he was first approached by members of local drug cartels. He wasn't from a wealthy family, and like many kids his age, he dreamed of helping his struggling parents. But unfortunately, that dream became the very thing that led him down a dark path. It starts off innocently enough, or at least that's how it was presented to him. The cartel didn't ask him to do anything violent at first. Instead, they gave him what seemed like easy work: selling methamphetamine. Now, to a 15-year-old, it didn't seem that risky. After all, he wasn't using the drugs himself, and the money they dangled in front of him was more than he'd ever seen. So, in his first semester of high school, Juan found himself juggling two lives, one as a student trying to pass his classes, and the other as a cartel operative dealing meth to classmates and other young people in his neighborhood. The deeper Juan got into the business, the harder it became to pull out. You see, the cartel doesn't just let recruits walk away. This was the same fate he would face. What started as simply selling drugs quickly escalated, as it always does. He was expected to sell even more, recruit other people, and eventually get involved in even more dangerous activities. Eventually, almost a year later, after school, some senior members of the cartel approached him with a new task. They gave him a gun and pictures of a rival cartel member who had been selling drugs on their territory. An assignment he carried out without flinching, simply because he had to. For the money, it kept flowing, but so did the fear. His grades began to slip, and his once normal life felt like it was spiraling out of control. He knew the risks. If he didn't deliver or cross the cartel, the consequences could be deadly. By the time police caught up with him, Juan was in deep, facing serious charges. His arrest was part of a larger crackdown on drug operations in his area. And his story quickly became another example of just how these cartels prey on vulnerable teenagers, really exploiting their need for money or just a sense of belonging. In his late teens, Juan, whose name was changed, was released from the youth correctional facility he was detained in for nearly 2 years. He's expressed deep regret for his previous crimes and is now mindful of his actions going forward. Cesar was in his mid-teens when he had thought he had left the life of crime behind him. At just a very young age, he'd moved with his parents to Eagle Pass, Texas, a town close to the Mexican border, a place that lurked with the dangers of cartel violence due to its location. And by his early teens, as a result of an introduction from his friend, Cesar was drawn into the dangerous world of Los Zetas. Forced into smuggling drugs and participating in dangerous activities, Cesar earned his place in the gang, but had the longing to escape. He'd seen enough. violence, threats, and the brutal murder of his friend Eduardo for defying cartel orders. After being deeply involved in the gang, Cesar wanted to start fresh. He joined his father in construction and tried living a normal life. However, the threat of cartel violence loomed. On September 25, 2013, Cesar got a call from a rival cartel, Cartel del Golfo, ordering him to do a job. They threatened his life when he refused, pushing Cesar to believe that night was going to be his last. So fearing for his life, he texted his probation officer and said goodbye to his family, believing there was no way out for him. Law enforcement intervened just in time, finding him armed and awaiting his dreadful fate. From there, Cesar was taken into custody and diagnosed with a nervous breakdown. It was at this point that he revealed the years of threats and violence he had faced from the cartel. Now, despite his attempts to break free, Cesar's past still haunts him. He was eventually released from Los Zetas, but the scars still remain. As he faces deportation, his family stands by his side, and medical professionals believe he can heal with time. But in his late teens, Cesar wants to rebuild his life from the start, hoping to leave behind the trauma and danger that once defined his youth. Ovidio Guzman Lopez, or El Raton, as he's often called, is one of the most notorious figures associated with the Sinaloa cartel, with his story closely tied to that of his infamous father, El Chapo. Born March 29, 1990, Ovidio is one of El Chapo's many children, but he's managed to distinguish himself as a key player in the family's drug empire. Growing up in the shadow of his father, Ovidio was exposed to the world of drug trafficking from a very young age. Even a U.S. grand jury indictment alleges Ovidio has been involved in his father's drug trafficking business since 2008, when he was just 18 years old. He and his brothers, often referred to as Los Chapitos, gradually took on more responsibility in the Sinaloa cartel, particularly after El Chapo's final capture and extradition to the U.S. in 2017. The family's legacy, combined with the cartel's extensive operations, made Ovidio a high-profile figure in the drug trade, more specifically in methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl distribution. Ovidio first came to a wider public attention in 2019 during a dramatic event. In October of that year, Mexican authorities briefly captured Ovidio in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. However, what followed was something straight out of an action movie. Over 600 cartel gunmen immediately launched a massive violent response, flooding the streets with armed forces and wreaking havoc across the city. Blockades, shootouts, and widespread panic ensued, with the cartel even taking soldiers and their families hostage. The Mexican government, just overwhelmed by the violence and fearing even more bloodshed, made the controversial decision to release Ovidio in exchange for peace. Well, that was pretty embarrassing for the government, which goes to show just how powerful these cartels are. But despite his brief detention, Ovidio remained a fugitive, and U.S. authorities continued to seek his arrest. On January 5, 2023, after years of pressure, Mexican security forces finally arrested him again in a heavily guarded operation. This time, the government was ready for their retaliation, and while there was still a lot of violence, Ovidio's capture was upheld firmly. Currently, he's incarcerated in the Special Housing Unit at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Now, the Bureau of Prisons Inmate Locator indicated that Ovidio Guzman Lopez was released on July 23, 2024, but then it was reported that U.S. authorities told Mexico he wasn't actually freed, but that his custody status had been changed. Gabriel Cardona's story is a tragic tale of transitioning from a poor kid in Laredo to being a cold-blooded killing machine, becoming Trevino's most valuable hitman. Born and raised in Laredo, Texas, Gabriel was just like any other teenager. He loved hanging out with his friends, enjoying the activities of someone his age. This kid started stealing cars and selling them across the border in Mexico. And living that close to the border, you can imagine that something darker was around the corner: cartel influence. And his life would take a tragic turn at the age of 17, from being a teenage petty criminal in Laredo to getting recruited by the Zetas. Now, this cartel was formed by elite soldiers who deserted the Mexican army to work for drug lords. They're known for brutal military-style tactics, and Cardona became one of their youngest recruits. You see, the cartel wanted teenagers like him because they could move freely between the US and Mexico without raising too much suspicion. So Gabriel quickly became entangled into this violent cartel operation. Alongside his friend, Rosalio Rea, another teen recruit, Gabriel became a sicario. His job was to carry out executions. But what's especially eerie was that he had his eyelids tattooed with eyes, giving the impression that they were always open, a reflection of his persona that he was creating as a cartel enforcer. The Zetas would send him and Rea on missions to take out their rivals and anyone who got in their way. In return, these teenagers lived flashy lifestyles filled with money, cars, and weapons. The violence was constant, but it would eventually catch up with them in the long run. Gabriel was arrested in 2006 after authorities linked him to several murders in Laredo. Now, he and Rea both cooperated with law enforcement, providing valuable information about the cartel's operations. Cardona was sentenced to 80 years in prison, where he remains to this day. Turns out being the first son of El Chapo just sealed the fate of Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar. And even without really knowing his father, he joined the Los Chapitos, or the Little Chapos, and has successfully maintained control in the drug trade. Born in 1983, Ivan grew up with the inner workings of the Sinaloa cartel. His path was predestined, given his family's legacy. But according to Inside Crime, Ivan was just a teenager when his father introduced him to the cartel. In his early 20s, Ivan faced legal trouble when he was arrested in 2005 in Mexico City on charges for money laundering. He spent several years in prison, but a lack of evidence led to his release in 2008. The arrest marked his first public entanglement with the law, and it definitely wouldn't be the last time his name made headlines. Upon his release, he got deeper into the operations for the Sinaloa cartel, and alongside his brothers, which included Jesus Alfredo and Ovidio, they would assume leadership roles within the organization, especially following their father's capture and subsequent extradition. Ivan's prominence within the cartel led to an ever-increasing scrutiny. In 2016, he and his brother Alfredo were kidnapped by a rival cartel, the CJNG, in a brazen attack at a restaurant in Puerto Vallarta. Now, the brothers were released shortly after, but the incident highlighted the intense rivalry between drug organizations in Mexico and their battle for dominance. And as the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Ivan and his brothers managed to retain their influence within the cartel, despite the risks that come with being El Chapo's sons. And we already gave you an example back in 2019 when they captured Ovidio in what's infamously known as the Culiacanazo incident. Those cartel gunmen compelled the government to release him, which demonstrated the power and influence of the Guzman family. At the moment, Ivan Salazar remains a key figure within the Sinaloa cartel, balancing a very dangerous and fractured drug trade landscape with the legacy of his father.